Hi, I'm David Zuckerman, Lieutenant Governor of Vermont. Welcome back. Today we have a digital hall. See, this is how it goes when you try it out live sometimes. Digital town hall conversation. And this discussion today is going to be on ranked choice voting. It's a method of voting that's been used to elect a congressman in Maine recently. It's being discussed in legislatures across the country. Bills have been introduced here in Vermont. And I'm joined by Kyle Bailey, who's an organizer from Maine who worked on ranked choice voting and getting it implemented in Maine and the campaign there and how that came to be, as well as Representative Laura Sibilia from Dover, who is one of the three primary sponsors on legislation here in Vermont, H 444, I believe it is. So that's easy to remember, 444. Because you're for this topic, just kidding. My understanding is it's a tripartisan sponsorship on that bill. And we're going to talk about what is ranked choice voting, why is it being discussed in Vermont again, and maybe Representative Sibilia, we can start with you about what prompted you to start engaging in the voting system, what's working, what isn't, and why would we want to change it?
Well, as you know, I'm an independent, so I have some thoughts right out of the gate about the parties and the election system.
Okay.
What's really been disconcerting to me is seeing the tone of politics in our elections. And I really worry, and I know you do too, about people disengaging from the elections and from wanting to be able to serve. And so what's really appealing to me about ranked choice voting is it really helps to promote and encourage both with the candidates, those that may want to run, and also with constituents, a much higher quality of engagement in our elections, and that can only serve us all better. So.
And even practically, we've seen, I think, in the last cycle presidential primary, there are those that argue that Donald Trump may not have ever been a majority-supported Republican, and there are others that most other Republicans might have supported, but with the way the system worked, someone who could have a plurality in a wide field might win. And then now in the Democratic primary presidential election, people are talking about how, wait a minute, someone who really isn't the majority supported person might win with a plurality because it gets so spread out. And yet, isn't it a good thing to have some more voices in the process talking about different issues, different perspectives on the issues that we're all challenged and facing? So I guess I present that as maybe it's not a partisan issue as well. It happens in each of the two major parties in the country where maybe the outcome isn't what the majority would want. What is some of your experience with that, and then turn that into what happened in Maine, if you could?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And so, Maine has had a long history of elections where there's been independent candidates who've run. At times, independents, Democrats, and Republicans, depending on the election, have been labeled spoiler candidates, or voters have come up to those candidates and said, I really like what you have to say about healthcare and education. Basically, I'm with you, but I worry if I vote for you, I'll help to elect the candidate I like the least. And so having that experience in a climate that has been, to Representative Sibilia's point, and I think you've talked about it too, is increasingly negative. That ranked choice voting is a simple, fair, and easy voting system that is completely nonpartisan. But it's something very simple we can do now to make a real change in our politics. People don't feel like their voices are being heard. And ranked choice voting is designed with the voter in mind, rather than the parties, PACs, and politicians. It puts the voters first, so that you can participate in an election as a voter and vote your hopes. You can rank your choices based on your true preferences, not based on polls or the need to vote strategically. The concerns about vote splitting disappear, and we saw that happen in Maine. We campaigned on this message. Voters twice approved ranked choice voting in Maine. And we had a 7-way Democratic primary for governor in Maine. That was a ranked choice voting process that went all the way through to help nominate the strongest candidate for that particular party. The Republicans also had ranked choice. And in the general election, we used it in the United States Senate in both congressional races. And the second CD in Maine got a lot of attention because it was a closely divided race in the first round, but no candidate got a majority. So we looked at the voters who said, I'm really frustrated with both political parties. I want to register my true preference for one of the independents. And voters who like one of those independents the best got to register that true preference, got to show up at the polls and feel like their voice was truly heard, but not feel like their vote is wasted, because they helped participate along with everyone else in Maine's 2nd District. in electing a majority congressman, and that's Jared Golden, who won that election. So that's the power of ranked choice voting, is what is the consensus of voters? What is the will of the people? And ranked choice voting captures that in a really powerful and meaningful way for the people.
And maybe to clarify that if you had a system that said if nobody gets 50%, there's a runoff. Some have said, well, why do those people get to vote twice, right? Well, everybody else only has the one vote. But the reality is in the runoff, those same original people that voted for the Republican or Democrat would likely, if their candidate's still there, vote for them again, and those others would vote. So it's not that one group gets 2 votes and somebody else only has 1. People create a lot of complexity here that I don't think is necessary.
Yeah, we make it a little more complicated.
To be thinking about.
I think you're absolutely right, and there's a reason why we call it ranked choice voting now. It used to be called instant runoff voting. For that very reason, it's the most cost-effective and efficient way to conduct a runoff, which is really what you need in most cases where you have more than 2 candidates to get a majority winner. Because what you don't want in a democracy is to have a candidate win who may be opposed by a majority of voters. That candidate's incentives are not to represent the fullness of their constituents. And with ranked choice voting, you elect someone, the voters elect someone who not only wins with first choice rankings, but also second choice rankings through the ranked choice process, and they're accountable more broadly to voters. And I think that's really significant, not just for voters in the participation process of election, but in the accountability of the governing process as well.
So what are some of the thoughts you have from Kyle's comments and why you're supporting this, or what the next steps might be? And what do you think it means for Vermont voters?
So I think that this means much more opportunity and choices for Vermont voters. We have a great tripartisan, as you said, coalition put together. We're looking at this as a 2-year plan. We're excited about working with a number of organizations to do a lot of public education and events this summer, and come back, work with you all in the Senate. We know Senator Pearson has championed a bill here, and move this through next year. The bill that we have introduced is a simple bill. It's a little different than bills that have been introduced in the past. And it's modeled exactly after Maine's, looking at the primaries and also our federal elections. And that was a tactical reason, obviously, to have something to point to and say, implemented, elected, used in an election, needed to be used to declare a winner, and then was also challenged and survived the Constitution and the challenge. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so we think that that's very helpful for Vermonters to be able to look and say, okay, in addition to all of these cities and other foreign countries that have been using this system for so many years, we've got another New England state that has implemented the same type of proposals that we're looking at, and it's working.
Yeah. And you said there's an organization that might be doing some work around this summer. Do you have a name and a website for that organization?
There are a number of organizations actually that have come to us and expressed concern that are working with our growing coalition. So League of Women Voters, VPIRG, Campaign for Vermont has expressed some interest, and so New Grassroots. I'm trying to think of there's quite a few. We actually have we've had a fantastic intern working for us, my daughter, this session, who popped up a website for us, which has been growing with information we think will be helpful. RankedChoiceVT.com. Okay. And that connects to a bunch of social media.
Interesting, because voting and Vermont both have VT. That's clever. Ranked Choice VT. Nice.
Yes. So.
.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You talked about a range of candidates. I'm curious also about a range of issues. Do you think that it helps allow for greater discussion about issues and less about who has a right to run, or sort of the sort of elite political world, which I think a lot of people are tired of? It's not just the right or the left. I think a lot of voters are tired of, why do insiders have a leg up? And insiders have a leg up through the party process, and the party process has these couple of parties, and how do you get power in those parties, and what's it like to be an independent here? And on the one hand, you could even talk about that a little, of maybe a little more freedom, but also a little more work to create coalitions or victories, because you don't have that power party structure that also leads to some people having more power.
That is absolutely true. And I would also tell you, that work is possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we are just
Right.
encouraged to do it, you know, and certainly I do not want to say that, you know, I have a number of colleagues to the left and to the right, and to the extra left, that, you know, I work together with here in this building, and that, you know, seek solutions together. But yeah, that work is possible, and I think ranked choice voting definitely promotes more of that. You know, we've testified today, and Kyle's done a great job of explaining, you need to be seeking in this type of a system, not only someone's first choice vote, but their second choice vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, just merely cutting down your candidates and not talking about issues actually isn't going to cut it.
Right.
So, you know, we have to be talking about the issues, what Vermonters need, the solutions that they're interested in seeing, and how to get there.
Well, if I can give an example, very personally, 3 years ago now, I was in a primary. Nobody got 50%. It was 42-ish to 36 to maybe 17 or 18. And there's been a lot of theories whether the third person in that race, whether more of those votes were hardcore Democrats, and therefore Shap Smith would have won with Keisha's second choice votes going there, or whether her support was primarily young and more progressive voting, but they knew her from UVM and from Burlington and didn't know me as well anymore because I hadn't represented that district in a while, and therefore their second choices would have gone to me. Nobody knows, right? But with in-runoff voting, that election result could have gone either way. I mean, at 42, I was still 8 points from 50, and 36, you know, he was 14 points from 50. But either way, there's enough room that, unless the vote was pretty balanced, if it was extreme one way or the other, it would have could have changed that outcome. And I still support it, just so people know, because I think it's helpful as an elected person to also know you've been elected with a majority viewpoint with respect to the remaining candidates.
My first election, when I ran for office, 3 candidates, same scenario.
Right, right.
So, and I still support it as well.
And we have presidential examples on either side. So again, in terms of making this something that isn't a left or right issue, Clinton, Perot, Bush, there are many that argue that Perot might have had votes that otherwise would have gone to Bush, and Clinton wouldn't have been president. Gore, Nader, Bush, folks have argued Nader cost that election, and even Clinton, Trump, Stein, this most recent election. So I think it's an issue that the reason we give these I give these different examples to point out that it isn't to benefit one side or another, because sometimes people say, oh, that's going to always benefit some. I don't think it's clear.
It's to benefit
The voter, and I think that goes back to some of your points.
That's absolutely right. This is all about the voter. You know, sometimes we think about politics in terms of parties, backs, and politicians, and not based on the people. And ranked choice voting really is a reform that's designed to put more power in the hands of voters and to refocus elections on what voters want and their interests. And because that's what this is all really about, right? People who come to this building have the best of intentions and want to work together and solve problems. But sometimes what happens on the campaign trail impacts those relationships and ability to work together in state houses. So wouldn't it be nice if we had a system that helped to flesh out, to your point, who those consensus candidates, representatives were from those communities? That they were elected not just with first choice rankings, but support from voters who may have liked another candidate better. So they walked into this building, and many already do, but it's helpful, I think, to think about the fact that, you know, you're here in this building working because you received support from people who didn't agree with you on every issue. And you talked to those voters, and you heard their concerns, and you absorb that information, and you think about the voter you talk to who may not agree with you all the time. That ranked choice voting would help encourage more of those conversations. And that's what we saw, that's what we've seen in Maine, and we've seen across the country in places that adopted this.
And even to talk to our people in Vermont, which we are the least supportive of Trump of any state in the country. I don't know if you're familiar with that statistic. But I think a lot of folks are concerned, for instance, that this president feels like the people that he has to talk to and focus on is that 40% that voted for him and not represent everybody. And I know, thankfully, in Vermont, most of us who are elected recognize that the elections and labels, whether it's as an independent, which is no party affiliation, so I would say it's a nonpartisan bill as opposed to a tripartisan bill, by the way,
Yes.
Or Democrat or progressive or Republican, is that once elected, those labels were there to help people get an understanding a little bit about you when you're campaigning for office, and to give them an idea of what direction you might lean on things. On the other hand, once you're in office, you're actually there to serve every constituent. You're not going to always agree with you all the time. You can't please every constituent, but you're actually there to serve every constituent. I want to go to an example. We were talking earlier, and you said you used to go to some schools in Maine and talk to first and third graders and start handing out a ballot. I don't remember what they were ranking.
I think we did crayon colors, ice cream,
right?
Yeah.
But that they almost had the ballots filled out and understood it before you were even explaining it.
Yeah.
So sometimes people think about it's really complicated.
Yeah.
Can you talk about complication or not?
Yeah, I mean, ranked choice voting really is simple. I mean, you're right. We have taken demonstrations in Maine, hundreds and hundreds of demonstrations at schools, elementary, middle, high school, Rotary clubs, chambers of commerce, county Democratic and Republican parties, and done mock elections, ranked choice beer elections at craft breweries. And people walk away overwhelmingly, this makes sense. The single most thing I heard from Mainers during 2 campaigns, one was this is common sense, and 2, why haven't we been doing this all along? That was Mainers' reaction. And when people pick up the ballot and look at it, it's so simple. It might be helpful just to explain to folks who maybe haven't read much about ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting before to explain how it works. Let's consider the 3 of us are running for the same office.
Tough
Now
competition.
it's tough. Clearly, I'm a carpetbagger from Maine, so I'm going to come in 3rd place. But there's there's some, and perhaps Laura comes in 1st place, you're in 2nd place, I'm in 3rd. But I run on this impassioned, progressive, Bernie agenda, and maybe we share some commonality, and maybe I even picked up and started handing out carrots in parades as well to try to take some of your vote away.
That's right.
Yeah, and then what happens is in that first past the post race, maybe Laura wins with 40% of the vote, but 60% of voters were kind of hanging out in our space, right? So ranked choice voting says, well, wait a minute, Laura came in 1st place, but she didn't get a majority. With ranked choice voting, we know exactly what's going to happen to get a majority winner, because I'm in last place, and instead of acting as perhaps a spoiler, people who voted for me could vote for me, because they genuinely believe I was the best candidate. But I'm out of the running because I came in last. And so people who voted for me picked up their ballot, and we look and see who do they like second between the 2 of you, right? And if there's a lot of vote splitting between us.
I'm sorry,
right?
Laura, the way he's setting it up. I think I'm going to win this one.
You win the race. So it's about trying to get to and voters can rank as many or as few candidates as they like. But the point is, your vote always counts for the candidate you ranked first, unless your 1st place candidate is eliminated. Then your vote counts for your 2nd choice and helps us select that consensus.
And while you were just saying that, I was thinking about if you've gone out to a restaurant or a place to eat, and you're like, I'll take the burger. And they're like, oh, whoops, I forgot to tell you we're out of burgers, which maybe you don't run out of burgers, maybe some other item. But you go, then I'll take the fish, People generally have a second choice, whether it's the type of ice cream you want, whether it's the meal you want at a restaurant, whatever it is.
We rank choices every day of our lives, but why can't we rank politicians?
When actually what you eat each day, while important for your health, probably isn't on an individual choice basis going to have the consequence of voting. Because the decisions that are made here at the State House or at the federal level impact people's lives every day. And we force people to be strategic, I would argue, with the system we have today, which is, I really like you, but I can't express that I would take you first because I'm afraid that Laura's going to get elected.
And it's fear-based, and it encourages negative campaigning and negative partisanship in the things that divide us rather than unite us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know you've got to run. Do you have a last thought you want to throw out there at all?
I just think, just a little shout out to all of us in elected office. It's hard to represent, actually, the varied constituencies that we are asked to represent. And so this system, I think, is even more helpful in terms of ensuring that the majority of voters have the representative, the lieutenant governor that they want to have, because that job, representing all of them, is challenging as it is. So.
And quickly,
Yes.
do you have any recollection? I've got some ballpark numbers in my head, but in a typical off-year election, and even in a typical presidential year election, or then even March elections, what percentage of people don't vote?
It's a lot.
Right?
It's a
I mean,
lot.
in March elections, it's more than 50%.
Yeah,
In off-year elections, it's often 40 or even 50%. And even in presidential years, it's maybe 30 to 40% of eligible voters don't vote. And I think this is another method to bring out that 10% more, 15% more, because they might finally say, you know what, I didn't want there to only be those two choices. Now I've got someone I could vote for. Now they also don't always have to vote a second choice, right? Yes,
That's right.
thank you. I know you have a meeting to go to.
Yes, thank you.
So Kyle and I will continue this, but they don't have to vote a second or third choice, correct?
You can rank as many or as few as you like.
So you can vote a first choice and say, you know what, I still don't like the two parties. I don't want to contribute a vote to either of them.
Sure.
Or you might say, well, since I'm here anyway. Another topic, and I don't know how this would fit in such a law, and maybe you've thought of it, but I'm throwing you a curveball here. We didn't prep on this one. There's a bill in the legislature to also have none of the above as an option.
Mm-hmm.
Now, blank votes are not counted. And so when one's trying to get to 50%, it's out of those that vote for something. Now, none of the above could be one of those, potentially, if this other bill passes. Now, it could come in third or fourth and then be eliminated, and some folks could say, my first choice is none of the above, and my second choice is Kyle, and my third choice is David or Laura. Would that mess up this system at all, or do you think it would work fine, unless it actually came in first?
I mean, I think any number of ranked choice voting is designed to accommodate competition in a healthy way. So whatever the legislature decides is criteria for a candidate or a line on a ballot is up to the legislature. But the great thing about ranked choice voting is you can vote your true preferences and rank those candidates and make your clear statement about your preferences. And you don't have to vote strategically or worry about wasted votes. And so I think that's an interesting concept. It's not something I've thought a lot about. But you know, in Maine, for example, we commonly have independent Green Party candidates. And we've had situations, to the earlier point about the nonpartisanship, where Republicans have been labeled as spoilers, and where Democrats are labeled as spoilers, and independents and Greens. And so the idea about ranked choice voting is, you know, if we want a healthy democracy, we need to encourage healthy competition. And we need structures to accommodate that competition, because the old system of picking one and praying that your candidate gets the most votes, it's a contentious process. And you know, politics is tough. It's difficult. There are decisions that have to get made, and some people don't get what they want. But we ought to strive as much as we can to find a commonality. Mm-hmm. And ranked choice voting is so profound in that way, because, you know, I'll just give you a quick anecdote. So in talking to voters about ranked choice voting in Maine, in June of 2018, the Democratic primary for governor used ranked choice voting with 7 candidates. I went to some of those debates on behalf of ranked choice voting to talk to voters. I had been to previous party primary, gubernatorial primaries debates. In the past, the conversations between voters were sort of contentious. Mm-hmm. You know, if you didn't support the same candidate,
the right person,
the conversation could either stop there. I could try to tell you something about your candidate that might undermine their credibility with you,
right.
Or I could tell you something about my candidate that made them far superior to yours. That's a naturally sort of contentious conversation. Fast forward to ranked choice voting in those gubernatorial debates, voters were sitting around saying, who are your top 3? Who are your top 3?
Wow.
It's a pretty good chance that there was some overlap.
Sure.
So you'd find commonality, and then it very quickly went to issues. It wasn't about personality.
Yeah.
It was about substantive policy. And people were having these great debates about nuanced policy and what they favored. And it wasn't negative. I mean, they definitely contrasted between candidates.
Sure.
But you also found commonality in that. And that's the sort of...
Is that gray area between black and white?
That's the gray area, which there's so much of.
In politics?
Yeah, because we get pulled to the extremes. I mean, we see it right now in our current political climate. It's so toxic. It's so tribal. And ranked choice voting, I think, helps to break through that structure by adding competition and allowing it to thrive and exist. Mm-hmm. And you know, there are some who might feel threatened by that. You know, I commonly have said in Maine, you know, it just means that there's a process where most of the time the Democrat or Republican will win, because there's a lot of advantages to party structure, right. and so that it just is. But if you're an independent candidate or a third party candidate, you can run and offer voters that meaningful choice. And if you can't win, if you're eliminated, voters didn't waste their vote. They have their vote counted for the remaining candidates.
And it may be actually moderates who historically I've found a little less inclined to support this, because they go, oh, this is just going to help the extreme right or the extreme left have a voice. In some ways, when I look at politics today compared to when I started getting involved in democracy, rather than calling it politics, but democracy 20 years ago, when that was the argument, was, oh, it helps the extremes. Mm-hmm. It may be that actually right now, it helps the middle. Mm-hmm. Because you know, in Vermont, I know the Republican Party, there's a big tear between the Trump supporters and folks who are good old New England Republicans that aren't quite so reactionary as this president, but who hold some fiscally conservative viewpoints, some socially fairly liberal or libertarian viewpoints, and they have nowhere to go, they feel right now. With a ranked choice voting system, could they also then run someone in a general election without fearing splitting whatever's left of the right of center vote, because then they could have a louder voice in that first round, but either win or lose. They might actually win, in which case some of the more extreme folks would have a choice of who their second choice would be, which is probably the moderate compared to the, you know, the moderate Democrat or the more liberal or left progressive. Though some might wrap around because it is not a line, but that's another
Right.
debate for another day. But is it possible that as we've gotten more polarized, this is actually more supported by moderates than maybe it used to be? Have you got any conversation like that with folks in Maine?
Yeah, you know, we've got support from across the political spectrum in Maine, and I see this across the country. There are places where Republicans are pushing this, places where Democrats are pushing this, places where independent third-party folks are doing it. There's coalitions like here in Vermont, and I think it's when you sort of sit down and look at this idea and what it is, you very quickly come to the idea that it's nonpartisan, and all of us tend to filter issues through the lens of our party or whatnot. But when you sort of look at this issue and really analyze it, you can't pigeonhole it as anything that's sort of partisan, because it's intended to give voters what they want and to not allow parties, PACs, or politicians to divide the vote and win when in fact they may be opposed by a majority of voters in that district. So yes, it encourages healthy competition in a way that serves the voter, which is what elections should be about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Any last thoughts you want to include? I know we talked earlier about website. What was that? Do you remember what that website was that Laura mentioned?
I think it's Ranked Choice VT.
RankedChoiceVT.com.
.com.
RankedChoiceVT.com.
And folks can go online and learn about the Maine experience of ranked choice voting at RCVMaine.com. So RCV Maine, all spelled out, .com, and find more information about what we did.
RCV being ranked choice voting.
That's right.
Excellent. Any last thought you want to include before we wrap up our conversation?
Well, I think it's important to thank you for being so outspoken in your support of this issue, and for, as you said, you've been in elections where you're not sure whether you would have won the majority, but you've decided to put voters first. And I think, you know, we need more leaders across the country to step up and do that. And I think more and more are, because voters are so frustrated with a political system where they don't feel like their voice is being heard. And ranked choice voting isn't a silver bullet, but it's something we've done in Maine. It's something folks can do in Vermont and across the country to help us fix this broken system and give more voice and more choice to voters and make elections about the best interests of voters and what they want and put them first.
Well, I appreciate that, and I agree. It's not the silver bullet. There's some other electoral changes. I think a lot of folks out there might or might not have issues with campaign finance. They might or might not have issues with how early people can vote or not. There's a lot of different issues state by state. There are different challenges out there to make sure we have as participatory a process as possible with folks feeling, and not just feeling, but having their voices count in that electoral process. And I think this is a pretty big one. And I appreciate your work on this in Maine, as well as coming across, which if you drove today, it's a beautiful sunny day, so I hope it was a nice day to drive across from Maine. If you had to go through the Whites, I imagine it was pretty stellar. But thank you for coming over. Maybe we'll be talking again. I know you testified in front of the Government Operations Committees a little bit today to just give them a little feel of how it worked in Maine and what Mainers feel about it, which I suspect is positive.
Very overwhelmingly so.
Overwhelmingly so, and even a third grader can do it.
That's right.
All right. Well, if third graders can do it, 10th graders can do it, 30-year-olds can do it, and octogenarians can do it. It's a matter of picking your favorite candidate and then maybe having a second or third choice and ranking those down as you go. And in the end, having a majority winner, which is an important reflection for the person who's elected to make sure they're representing the majority, as well as voters able to really express their views through their vote. So thank you for the conversation, Kyle. Thank you. Laura, who had to go back to a committee meeting, I want to thank Representative Sibilia for being one of the primary sponsors. As was mentioned, this bill has 3 primary names. Normally you have 1 and then it's alphabetized, but there are 3 to show the nonpartisan nature of the leadership for this bill. and I think it has a good chance of being discussed over the summer and fall, and maybe come back next spring for implementation for some future election. So if you're interested, check out rcvmaine.com or what is it again? RankedChoiceVT.com. We always have help off to the side, and it's none of us do this alone. Thank you for watching. Please come back, and please feel free to visit ltgov.vermont.gov for past episodes and other issues that we're talking about here in the State House.